General questions. Question number 1, Michael McMahon.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it expects to receive Barnett consequentials as a result of the UK Government's recently announced Advice Services Transition Fund, and if so, whether it will allocate these to advice services in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, I can confirm that the Scottish Government has received Barnett consequentials from the UK Government arising from advice services amounting to £3.4 million over financial years 2013-14 and 2014-15. We are currently considering how we can best support advice services in Scotland, and this will be informed by the draft budget 2013-14 consultation process.
Michael McMahon.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response. I think the key word in my question, Cabinet Secretary, was to advice services and not for advice services, because in the past, monies I know have been allocated for advice services but haven't actually made their way to organisations like Citizens Advice or other independent advice services. Those organisations are telling the Welfare Reform Committee and this Parliament about the pressures that they are already undergoing because of the welfare reforms that are coming from Westminster. We need to know that Citizens Advice Scotland and other bodies will receive funding in order to help them cope with the pressures that are coming on them. Can you guarantee that the monies, the consequentials that will come from this fund will go to these organisations? And will you commit to ring-fencing that money so that it can be allocated directly?
Cabinet Secretary.
As Mr McMahon will be familiar from, and I suspect it's at the heart of the very last point that he's made, that the Government has generally taken an approach not to ring-fence funds that have been passed to local government other than for very specific reasons, and that we have set up agreements with local government as to how advice and other services are to be supported at local level. Clearly, there is a significant issue arising for Scotland out of the welfare reform agenda pursued by the United Kingdom Government, with which Mr McMahon and his committee are very familiar, and I acknowledge the significant issues that are at stake in this respect. What I would say to Mr McMahon is that the Government is involved in substantive dialogue with the advice sector within Scotland on this particular question, and as I indicated in my original answer, I expect these issues to be considered fully within the consultation process around the draft budget for next financial year.
Question number 2, David Torrance.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it will take to raise energy productivity in Scotland in order to ease energy cost burdens on individual households, as well as create a more competitive marketplace for small businesses.
Minister Fergus Ewing.
Also, we are raising energy productivity in Scotland in line with our purpose to increase sustainable economic growth by spending around £250 million over the spending review period on fuel poverty and energy efficiency. Our Energy Saving Scotland Advice Network continues to provide support to household and small businesses on all aspects of energy efficiency, and from April next year we will be bringing together our business, energy, resource and water efficiency into a single integrated Resource Efficient Scotland programme. It will provide intensive support to help small and medium enterprises reduce overheads through improved energy, material resource and water efficiency.
David Torrance.
I thank the Minister for his answer. Does the Minister agree that the emphasis on greater energy productivity in the future not only helps to compensate for diminishing oil and gas resources, but also is, with the Government's energy efficiency infrastructure and renewable strategy in mind, the best way to ensure a reduction in cost for Scottish families and businesses in the long term?
Minister.
Well, of course, Scotland's oil and gas resources are still absolutely massive, and they're worth £1.5 trillion. And an additional 1% of extraction above the average at the moment will lead to £22,000 million of tax revenue if our policies are pursued. But I do agree that cutting our energy usage is sensible and it's necessary, and we're totally committed to that. And we're also, Presiding Officer, developing a national retrofit programme using Scottish Government funding of £65 million a year to lever in resources from energy companies in the private sector and others to create a fund of around £200 million a year to improve energy efficiency in our homes and help address fuel poverty.
Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There are great concerns in my constituency regarding the proliferation of wind farms. What guidance is there to local communities, Minister, regarding buy-in schemes whereby communities could profit directly from local energy productivity?
Minister.
Entirely fortuitously, Presiding Officer, I spent this very morning at a conference which took place at my behest to bring together developers and communities. And I'm delighted to say that we've seen over 3,400 programmes throughout Scotland take place. Communities all over Scotland are benefiting from this. My good friend Stephen O'Hagan from Cosla, who's in charge of this area, told me that in the island of Westray, the amount of money that they receive has enabled 2 young men to purchase a fishing boat. And therefore, the money from renewable energy in Scotland is now helping create jobs in rural and island communities in Scotland. And the best is yet to come.
Question number 3, Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it plans to change the guidelines on breast screening for 50 to 70-year-olds.
Cabinet Secretary Alex Neil.
Presiding Officer, the recent Marmot review concluded that the breast screening programme conferred significant benefit and should continue. In keeping with this conclusion, we have no plans to amend guidelines on screening. The review also concluded that breast cancer screening extends lives through early detection and treatment, but it acknowledged that screening can sometimes result in overdiagnosis. In light of this, and in keeping with the recommendations of the review, we will ensure that the information that women receive regarding screening is of the highest quality.
Maureen Watt.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary very much for that answer? With the number of people diagnosed with breast cancer in Scotland as high as 4,000 per year, 20 of whom are men, does the Minister think that action should be taken to maintain and expand rather than cut back the breast screening programme? Any scaremongering on unnecessary procedures should not deter women from having screening where many cancers can be detected at a very early stage.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, breast screening saves lives, and the Scottish Government fully supports the Scottish breast screening programme and the benefits that screening offers, and there will be no dilution in the service whatsoever. The Scottish Government receives expert advice on who should be screened from the Breast and Cervical Screening National Advisory Group. All recommendations from the advisory group are evidence-based, with current evidence supporting screening for all women between the ages of 50 to 70 years.
Jackie Bailey.
And I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's comments that screening will continue because women need certainty about the breast screening programme. Would he agree with me, though, that more needs to be done to improve the uptake for women in disadvantaged areas where levels of access are consistently lower?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, we know that uptake of breast screening is lowest in women with learning disabilities and in areas of deprivation. While it is the responsibility of NHS boards to ensure uptake locally, the Scottish Government supports the boards with high-quality information which has been tested with women from areas of deprivation in a number of languages, and we will continue to work effortlessly to increase the uptake overall and particularly in deprived communities.
Question number 4, Anne McTaggart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it plans to offer access to training and education to the 21,280 people reported in the Herald on the 27th of October 2012 as being on college waiting lists.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Russell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I say I welcome this question from Anne McTaggart because it is my firm hope that all members will come to understand that waiting lists, which are maintained by colleges for administrative and course-specific purposes, were never intended to and cannot constitute a national means of determining sector-wide demand for places. Many people will appear on more than one list. Some lists may contain people who have taken up another place in education or employment who otherwise may have lost interest. The idea that you can measure demand simply by aggregating such diverse lists in every subject, in every college, is wholly misleading. However, what I do hope that Anne McTaggart and I could agree on is the importance of clearly understanding the process used by colleges in handling applications for places and moving towards a collection of much better quality data on college applications. With that in mind, I intend to undertake an audit of the whole process of college applications, including a detailed examination of Scotland's colleges' data and methodology to ensure it delivers maximum benefit for Scotland's young people.
Anne McTaggart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply, and I understand he has been asked to provide Parliament on several occasions with the number of individuals on college waiting lists, and it took an article by the Herald to finally reveal the scale of the problem we face. Despite his protests, it is clear that there are such numbers available and that there are thousands being left without access to further education each year. Cabinet Secretary, how could you let this happen?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'm sorry that the member did not listen to my answer. It's always a mistake to write the supplementary before you've heard the answer. I said, and I repeat, Presiding Officer, some lists may contain people who have taken up another place in education or employment or may otherwise have lost interest. The idea that you can measure demand simply by aggregating diverse lists in every subject, in every college, is wholly misleading. And indeed, to be fair to the Herald story, and to be fair to the statistics sent to the Herald by Scotland's colleges, even those figures said that they did not believe that 21,280 people were on waiting lists because they acknowledged those problems. And that is why I said, and again, I said it in my original answer, but I'm happy to say it again, that is why I intend to undertake an audit of college applications, a detailed examination of the methodology and data used by Scotland's colleges, because we need to make sure that what we are doing is serving Scotland's young people, not trying to use very doubtful data for political purposes, is what we have just heard.
Linda Fabiani.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary could comment on the feasibility, as part of this audit, of looking into a system of clearing for students of colleges similar to that which exists for universities, which may take away from some of these issues regarding numbers.
Cabinet Secretary.
There has been considerable discussion with colleges over many years about how they improve their data collection and how they improve their processes in terms of application. We need to balance the local measures and the local level of application with a much greater clarity about what the national data is. And therefore I welcome the member's suggestion. I do intend to remove the scope for such confusion through the work we plan with colleges which I've just outlined, and that will lead, I hope, to an agreement across the college sector, the reformed college sector, the college sector much in need of reform, in that reformed college sector that they will work more closely together to have a better system, just as the member mentions.
Question number 5, Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it considers that separate street traders' licences should be obtained for food stalls that operate within confines of fun fairs that have been granted a public entertainment licence.
Minister Derek Mackay.
The Civic Government Scotland Act 1982 does not require a separate street traders licence for an activity already licensed under a public entertainment licence. However, local licensing authorities enjoy wide discretion in how they administer local licensing regimes and can apply the law to the specific facts and circumstances of individual cases.
I thank the Minister for his answer, but would the Minister not agree with me that the local authorities should not insist that a separate street traders licence be obtained for food stalls which are operated within the confines of a fun fair, when this clearly contradicts the information, as he already has said, contained in section 39(3)(e) of the Civic Government Scotland Act 1982?
Minister.
I would advise Mr Lyle that local government does have the discretion to deploy the law in the way that I've outlined. It will depend on local circumstances as to what's appropriate. I would encourage, of course, local authorities to act proportionately in delivering both a simplified and streamlined light touch regulation whilst looking after both health and safety and proper hygiene. But remind the member it is a matter for local authorities to determine as long as they operate within the law, and the member is perfectly entitled to offer the Council appropriate advice.
Question number 6, Marco Biaggi.
To ask the Scottish Government how it will ensure high sustainability standards in future biomass energy generation.
Minister Fergus Ewing.
The Scottish Government is currently consulting on expanded sustainability criteria for the Renewables Obligation Scotland, including new and more stringent limits on carbon emissions from dedicated biomass and biomass CHP stations.
Mark Biaggi.
I very much welcome the consultation and the object of that. As the Minister may know, I was, albeit as a latecomer, a supporter of the Stop Leith Biomass campaign and have maintained a close interest since. Would the Minister be willing to meet me as part of the discussion, as part of the consultation, to discuss the issues involved?
Minister?
Yes, I will.
Claire Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. While recognising that the subsidy has been removed from electricity-only stations, is the Minister aware of concerns that the proposal to define good quality CHP across the UK as those having a 35% efficiency level, which is considerably lower than the EU directive which states a level of at least 70% for industrial applications, that there are concerns that will create a loophole for inefficient biomass generation, and does he agree we should be seeking to increase the level of efficiency at which subsidies can be claimed? Minister?
I think the member makes a reasonable point. The consultation proposals, and I stress it's a consultation, so we have not, and by definition have not prejudged any outcome, suggest a different approach from that which I believe to be the one that is being proposed down south. And that is that there should be a threshold which we have proposed should be 10 megawatts, which would apply to the use of biomass to produce electricity only. And above that, the biomass plant should be capable of providing electricity and heat. And in that, reaching that view which we've put forward for the consultation, we've taken account in particular of views of all members of this House that they have put to me, including Mr Biaggi, and also those of the traditional timber sawmilling sector who have pointed out that timber is a finite resource and they have a call on it which we recognise, and they are providing a great deal of employment in many rural communities.
Question number 7, Joe McAlpine.
To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it's had with stakeholders regarding the economic and employment benefits of the national grid upgrade in the south of Scotland.
Minister Fergus Ewing.
I met with Frank Mitchell from Scottish Power Energy Networks and Chair of Energy Skills Action Group on the 1st of November, Presiding Officer, to discuss a range of issues, including investment in the transmission and distribution network of southern Scotland. Planned investment by Scottish Power Energy Networks over the next 10 years amounts to £2,600 million. That will see the creation of up to 1,500 jobs in Scotland. Early indications are that this investment programme will create further employment, with approximately 450 new directly associated jobs being needed and many other opportunities locally. Additionally, through Skills Development Scotland, we are supporting Scottish Power and Dumfries and Galloway College in order to develop specialist training provision to meet expected demand for trained linesmen in that area.
Joe McAlpine.
I thank the Minister for his answer, and those figures are very welcome indeed. Can he confirm my understanding that the growth of Scotland's renewable sector in the south of Scotland has made the upgrade necessary?
Minister.
Well, that is entirely right. It is entirely right that the renewable energy policies of Scotland have now led to the certainty that we will see investment not only in the south of Scotland but in the north of Scotland on a massive scale. Members will be aware of the press release this morning issued by Scottish and Southern Energy, which states, and I quote, there could be potentially £5,000 to £10,000 million of investment in the Highlands and Islands and its energy network. Presiding Officer, because, and only because, of the certainty and clarity of our renewable energy policy in Scotland, will we see untold, unprecedented and unparalleled benefits for this country for the next several decades.
May I remind members that phones and other electronic devices should be switched off. Question number 8, Liz Smith.
To ask the Scottish Government how it plans to commemorate the centenary of the outbreak of the First World War.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
The Scottish Government is working with a range of military and veterans organisations, cultural bodies, education groups and the UK Government on proposals to commemorate the centenary of the conflict and will ensure Scotland plays
its full part in World War I commemorations over the period 2014 to 18, remembering the role and sacrifice of Scottish servicemen and the wider impact on society. I met with 19 Scottish organisations on the 3rd of July to share and set out plans. Have had 2 meetings with the UK representative in May and July. Events planned will include, for example, 2 exhibitions at the National Museum of Scotland.
Liz Smith.
I thank the Minister very much for her answer. That's encouraging to hear that. As the Minister will know, the UK Government has already announced some plans to commemorate the centenary by a new flagship scheme to offer thousands of school children the opportunity to visit the Great War battlefields, as well as a £50 million fund to help support community events. The Scottish Government, I know, has found some funding for the commemoration of the Battle of Bannockburn. So could I ask the Cabinet Secretary to outline what financial support the Scottish Government could provide on this basis?
Minister.
Many schools in Scotland already organise visits to World War I battlefields. Indeed, in my constituency, I know of a school that goes on an annual basis. We're discussing how these trips, another existing learning activity about World War I, might support and complement the Centenary Education Programme. We're looking forward to identifying the consequentials in the autumn budget revision in terms of funding being available. But she might be aware of the £50 million announced by the Prime Minister. 35 of that was for the Imperial War Museum, which was announced last February as a plan for refurbishment. I do think we need to take our roles and responsibility in commemoration, particularly at this time, Presiding Officer, very seriously. And I think for future generations, learning the lessons of war and commemorating those who have lost their lives is very important indeed for this Government.
Before we move to First Minister's question, members will wish to join me in welcoming to the gallery the President of the Australian Senate, the Honourable John Hogg.